Fluorescent light in the break room had been flickering for 3 weeks. Nobody fixed it. That was the kind of place Meridian Fabrication was. Things broke, things stayed broken, and you just learned to work around them. I'd been working around things for 12 years. My name is Clint. I was 53 years old, a senior quality systems engineer, and for over a decade I had been the person who kept our automotive components division from falling apart at the seams. Not because anyone asked me to go above and beyond, but because when you spend 12 years building something, a process, a system, a reputation with clients, it becomes part of you. You can't just clock out and leave it at the door. My wife Susan was wrapping up her second round of treatment that spring. Breast cancer caught early enough, but still, the medical bills had a way of arriving in batches, like they were coordinating with each other. Our insurance through Meridian was good. That mattered. It mattered more than I let myself think about too often, because once you start calculating how much you need a job, you start making excuses for things you shouldn't excuse. I started making excuses around February. That was when they brought in the new division director. I'll be honest, I didn't hate him right away. My new boss came in with a firm handshake and a lot of talk about modernizing the culture and building the right team around the right people. He was maybe 40, wore fitted shirts, said things like, "Let's unpack that in meetings." I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Every new boss deserves 90 days before you form an opinion. That's always been my rule. He used those 90 days to bring in his nephew. The nephew, I'll call him what he was, my new boss's nephew, showed up in March. 26 years old, a business degree from a school I'd never heard of. Zero manufacturing experience. He was assigned to shadow me. "Learn the ropes," my boss said. "We want fresh eyes on the QC workflow." I didn't think much of it. We'd had interns before. I showed him the system, walked him through our ISO documentation, explained how we managed the client-facing audit reports for the 3 big OEMs we supplied. He nodded a lot, took notes on his phone, asked questions that were sometimes sharp and sometimes so off base that I'd have to pause and recalibrate how I was explaining things. He was a fast learner. I'll give him that. What I didn't understand, what I was too close to see, was that I wasn't training an assistant. I was training my replacement. The first sign was a meeting I wasn't invited to. In 12 years, I had never missed a quarterly client review. I'd run most of them. Our main OEM contact, a sharp woman named Diane who had been in the industry for 20 years, specifically requested my presence because I knew the history of every deviation report going back to 2016. I was the institutional memory of that relationship. In April, I got a calendar invite for a different meeting, an internal process alignment session scheduled at the exact same time as the quarterly review. When I flagged it to my boss, he said, "Don't worry about the OEM call. I'm going to have my nephew sit in on that one. Good development opportunity." I nodded. I said okay. I went home that night and sat at the kitchen table for a long time after Susan went to bed. I told myself I was overthinking it. By May, I couldn't tell myself that anymore. My access to the client portal got updated, which meant my nephew now had primary access and I had read only. My boss explained it as a system restructure. I was CC'd on emails I used to be the sender of. In one meeting, my boss referred to the QC system as something we've been developing, looking at his nephew when he said it. I built that system over 4 years. I had the scar tissue to prove it. 3 failed audits in year 1, 2 client escalations in year 2, the 60-hour weeks in year 3 before we finally got it right. I remember the night we passed our first perfect audit. I called Susan from the parking lot and she cried a little and said she was proud of me. My boss had been at the company for 11 weeks. I started keeping notes. Not because I was planning anything, I wasn't, not then. But something in me knew that documentation had always been my protection. If you write it down, it exists. If it exists, you can point to it. June was when I found out for certain. I ran into one of the HR coordinators in the parking garage. A woman I'd known for years, solid person, had been at Meridian almost as long as I had. She gave me a look that I recognized. It was the look people give you when they know something they can't say. She asked how I was doing in that specific way that meant she was really asking something else. I asked her directly, "Is there something I should know?" She looked at her keys. "I can't say anything official, Clint. I'm not asking for official." She said quietly that there had been conversations about restructuring the QC leadership, that the new director was building his own team, that my role was being, and here she paused and chose her word carefully, reimagined. I thanked her. I drove home. I sat in the truck in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. Susan was in the kitchen making tea. She asked how my day was. I said, fine. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window looking at the backyard, at the garden she'd been slowly reclaiming since she started feeling better. The tomatoes were coming in. She'd planted extra this year. I didn't tell her what I'd heard. Not that night. She had enough to carry. I spent that weekend going through 12 years of files, every system I'd built, every process I'd documented, every client protocol. I knew it all cold. But I also knew something that my boss did not seem to understand. Not all of it was written down. Some of it lived in relationships. 12 years of quarterly calls with Diane. 8 years of knowing that one of our other OEM contacts, a detail-oriented guy who genuinely cared about traceability, preferred email over phone for anything audit-related because he documented everything for his own team. Small things. Human things. The stuff that doesn't make it into a process manual because you can't write down trust. That weekend, I made a decision. Not an angry decision. A clear one. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to send a bitter email or burn anything down or give my boss the satisfaction of watching me unravel. I had too much self-respect for that, and honestly, I was too tired. I was 53 years old. Susan was getting better. I had 12 years of credibility in this industry, and I was done spending it on people who had decided I was disposable. I updated my resume on Sunday night. I also called an old colleague, a guy named Bud, who I'd worked with 15 years ago before he went independent and started his own quality consulting firm. We'd stayed in touch. He'd mentioned a couple of times over the years that if I ever wanted to make a move, there'd be a conversation to have. I never took it seriously. I took it seriously now. Bud called me back Monday morning before I'd even gotten to work. We talked for 40 minutes. He laid out what a partnership could look like. I would come in as a senior consultant, bring my client relationships to the extent those clients wanted to follow, and build out a specialty in OEM audit prep, which was exactly the niche I'd been operating in for a decade. The numbers he described were more than I was making at Peridian. The benefits package, he said, they'd been working on for new partners. He'd send me details, but he thought it would cover what I needed. I asked about Susan. I told him about the treatment, about the insurance situation. He didn't flinch. We'll make it work, Clint. That's not a deal breaker, that's just something we plan around. I sat in my car in the Meridian parking lot for a few minutes after we hung up. Then I walked in, said good morning to the receptionist, got myself a cup of coffee, and went to my desk. I didn't say a word to anyone. The official conversation happened on a Thursday in late June. My boss called me into his office at 2 in the afternoon. He had a prepared look. That careful, managerial neutrality people put on when they've rehearsed what they're going to say. He told me the company was evolving its organizational structure. He told me my role was being transitioned. His nephew, he explained, would be taking over as QC director. He said this with a straight face. 3 months. The kid had been there 3 months. He offered me a lateral move to a documentation specialist position. Different title, fewer responsibilities, and though he didn't say this directly, a clear signal about where I stood. I listened to all of it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push back. I asked a few clarifying questions, the kind that showed I'd understood everything he said, and then I told him I'd need some time to think it over. He looked a little surprised. I think he expected either pushback or immediate acceptance. He wasn't expecting calm. I gave him calm. I gave my notice 2 weeks later. I wrote the letter at home on a Saturday morning while Susan was out at her follow-up appointment. I kept it short, professional, grateful for the opportunities, wishing the team well, committed to a smooth transition. I printed it, signed it, put it in an envelope. When Susan got home, I told her. I laid out the whole thing, what had happened with my boss and his nephew, the conversation with Bud, the numbers, the benefits. I'd done the math already. Between my severance, the new offer, and the way Bud had structured the insurance, we were actually going to be okay. Better than okay, if things went the way Bud thought they would. She sat at the kitchen table and listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Took you long enough." I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in weeks. She said she'd watched me coming home tense for months. She'd seen it in the way I held my shoulders when I walked in the door, the way I go quiet after checking my phone. She said she'd been waiting for me to say something, but she didn't want to push because she knew I had to get there myself. "You built something real there," she said. "They just forgot it was yours." I walk into my boss's office on a Monday and handed him the envelope. He read it. Read it again. Then he looked up and said, "Clint, let's talk about this. I think there may have been some miscommunication." "There wasn't," I said. "Not mean, just clear." He asked if I'd reconsider. I said no. He asked what it would take. I said I appreciated the question, but the decision was made. I told him I was committed to wrapping up my open documentation cleanly during the transition period, which was true. I'm not the kind of person who leaves things half done, but I also was not going to sign over certain client-facing protocol documents until HR confirmed my final compensation package in writing. Something my employment attorney, I'd made that call 2 weeks earlier, had specifically advised. My boss didn't like that. He kept his face neutral, but I could see it. I didn't enjoy the moment the way I thought I might. Mostly I just felt steady. I spent my last 3 weeks wrapping up what I could wrap up. I didn't sabotage anything. I want to be clear about that, because I think it's important. I'm not that person. I documented everything I was supposed to document. I answered questions when asked. I was professional to everyone on the team because none of them had done anything wrong. The people on my team weren't responsible for what management decided. But I did do one thing. About a week before my last day, I got a call from Diane. She'd heard through the grapevine that I was leaving. She wanted to know if it was true. I told her yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked where I was going. I told her about Bud's firm. I gave her the basic details, the specialty, the focus area, the kind of work we'd be doing. She asked if I'd be willing to connect once I'd settled in. She said, and I want to be careful about how I say this because she was professional about it, that the OEM she represented had certain vendors they preferred to work with long-term. That continuity mattered to their internal audit team, that she wasn't making any commitments, but she wanted to stay in contact. I said I'd like that very much. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular. Her daughter had gotten into her first-choice college. I told her Susan was doing well. Small things. The kind of conversation you have when you've worked alongside someone for 8 years and you actually like each other. My last day was a Friday. There was a small send-off in the break room. The one with the flickering light, which was finally fixed, I noticed, the week after I gave notice. Somebody ordered a sheet cake. I shook hands, hugged a couple of people, said the right things. I met most of them. I packed my desk. 12 years fit into one medium-sized cardboard box, which I always think is either depressing or freeing depending on how you look at it. I chose freeing. I drove out of the parking lot for the last time on a Friday afternoon in late July. The sun was doing something specific to the cornfields along the highway, one of those evenings where the light goes flat and gold before it drops. I had the windows down. I wasn't in a hurry. I thought about the first day I'd started at Meridian. I'd been 41. I had 2 kids in middle school and a mortgage and a real fear that I'd made a lateral move that would take years to pay off. I remembered thinking, on that first drive-in, that I just needed to prove myself, show up, do good work, build something worth keeping. I'd done that. They just forgot it was mine. Bud and I started the partnership formally in September. The first month was slower than either of us expected. That's the honest truth, and I think it's important to say, because these stories sometimes skip the part where it's hard. I spent a lot of August at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and coffee, rebuilding client decks from scratch, updating my credentials, learning the administrative side of running an independent practice after 12 years of having infrastructure handed to me. There were mornings I second-guessed myself. Susan would come downstairs and see the look on my face and say, "Still worth it?" Every time after a pause, the answer was yes. By October, we had 3 signed contracts. By November, Diane's OEM had formally brought us on for their annual audit prep cycle, a 6-month engagement. When Bud saw the contract value, he called me and just said, "Clint, what did you build over there?" I thought about that for a while. I think what I built wasn't the system. The system was just the visible part. What I actually built was 12 years of showing up, early, late, when it was tedious, when it was hard, when nobody was watching. I built a reputation that belonged to me, not to the company that employed me. And when I left, it left with me. My boss's nephew took over the QC director role in August. I heard through people I stayed in touch with that the first major client audit, one I'd been prepping for over 2 years, ran into significant problems, multiple findings, a corrective action plan that the OEM wasn't satisfied with. The team scrambled. My boss flew in from another site. They brought in a third-party consultant to help stabilize things. I don't know all the details. I didn't ask. It wasn't my problem anymore. I'm telling this story now because I think there's something real in it that doesn't always get said. When you're in it, when you're sitting in a parking garage listening to someone tell you what you already knew was coming, the thing that gets you is the smallness of it, not the betrayal exactly, more the casualness of it. The way 12 years can be reimagined in a conference room in 45 minutes by someone who's been there 11 weeks. The way loyalty, which I know is an old-fashioned word, just doesn't factor into the calculation. And I think about the people who are still sitting in those break rooms right now, under the flickering lights, telling themselves they're overthinking it. You probably not. What I learned, and I don't say this to sound wise, just honest, is that the thing they can take is your position. They can take your title, your access, your seat at the table. What they cannot take is the work itself, the actual relationships, the trust people have in how you operate. That stuff doesn't transfer when they promote someone new. It doesn't get inherited, it follows you. And that's not a small thing. That's everything. Susan finished her last follow-up scan in October. Clean. The oncologist said exactly what you want an oncologist to say, and Susan called me on my cell while I was in a client meeting, and I stepped out into the hallway and just stood there for a minute with the phone against my chest. Then I walked back in and finished the meeting. That night we went out to dinner, just the two of us. A place we've been going to since our kids were little. The kind of restaurant that hasn't changed its menu in 30 years. We didn't make a big speech about it. We ordered the same things we always order. We talked about the garden, about our youngest who was thinking about graduate school, about whether we wanted to do a road trip in the spring. Normal things. Good things. On the way home, she reached over and put her hand on my arm and said, "You made the right call." I knew she wasn't just talking about the restaurant. If you've ever been in a job where you gave everything and still felt invisible, if you've ever watched someone walk in and take something you spend years building, I want you to know that the feeling you have right now, that mix of anger and grief and doubt, that's not weakness. That's just what it feels like to care about something. The question isn't whether it's fair. It usually isn't. The question is what you do with what you actually have, which is the work, the relationships, the hard-won knowledge that 12 years of showing up gives you. They can reorganize your title. They cannot reorganize your reputation. I drove to work for the first time as a partner on a Tuesday morning in September. Different office, different commute, same coffee and the same travel mug I've been using for 8 years. I sat in the parking lot for a minute the way I always do, just to settle in before the day starts. Then I went inside. I've thought about what happened a lot since then. Not in a bitter way. I'm past that. More in the way you turn something over in your hands to understand the shape of it. Here's what I keep coming back to. My boss didn't do anything that doesn't happen 1,000 times a day, in offices and warehouses and conference rooms all over this country. He had someone he wanted to put in a seat, and he moved the pieces to make it happen. That's not unusual. What's unusual is believing, after 12 years of watching it happen to other people, that it couldn't happen to you. I believed that for too long. That belief cost me some sleep and some months of quiet dread that I probably didn't have to carry if I'd been paying attention earlier. The lesson I take from that isn't about loyalty being foolish. I still believe in doing your work well and treating people right. But I think I confused the institution with the work itself. I gave Meridian credit for things that actually belonged to me. The client relationships, the systems, the trust Diane and others had built with me over years. None of that was Meridian's. It was mine. I just hadn't claimed it yet. What my boss couldn't see, what I think people in positions of authority often miss, is that you can reorganize a title. You can reassign an office, change an access level, hand a new business card to someone with the right last name. What you cannot do is transfer the thing underneath all of that. 12 years of showing up when it was hard, of answering the call at 6 a.m. when a client had a compliance problem, of knowing not just the process but the people. That doesn't get inherited. It follows the person who built it. I think about Clint sitting in that parking lot the night after talking to the HR coordinator. I was scared. I want to say that plainly, because I think we don't say it enough. I was 53 years old. My wife was still in treatment, and the idea of walking away from a steady paycheck and good insurance felt like standing at the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. Fear is real. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means the stakes are real. What got me through wasn't some sudden burst of confidence. It was something quieter, a recognition that I had already done the hard part. The work was done. The reputation was built, the relationships existed. All I had to do was trust that those things were real and would hold. They held. Susan asked me once after everything settled whether I regretted waiting so long to make the move. I thought about it honestly, and the truth is, I don't know that I could have made the move any earlier. I had to reach the point where staying felt more dangerous than leaving. That point comes differently for everyone. You can't force it. You can only be ready when it arrives. If you're sitting somewhere right now feeling invisible after years of real work, I just want to say this: what you've built is yours. It doesn't belong to the org chart. It doesn't belong to whoever holds the title above you. The moment you walk out the door, you take it with you. The only question is whether you trust that enough to go.